It's connected? Yeah.
Prasad, I made it live.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, now we are live. Please go ahead. Yeah.
So firstly, I'll introduce the speaker, then we can start.
Yeah, please.
So good evening to all the esteemed members of the Ocean Society of India, ladies and gentlemen. We know that this Ocean Society of India conducts these invited talks, which is part of this webinar series, which is held once in every month. And this talk is arranged from eminent scientists, engineers, academic professionals working in the broad area of atmospheric and oceanic sciences, ocean engineering technology, and allied areas. And this webinar is mainly targeted for students, researchers, scientists, engineers, and working professionals in the field of atmospheric sciences, ocean sciences, engineering and technology disciplines, with a motive to impart and improve the knowledge benefiting the OSI community. So I request all the members to actively participate and get involved in all the lectures under this webinar series that is held every month. So on behalf of the Ocean Society of India, it is my proud privilege today to welcome Dr. Manish Tiwari for this invited talk. So Dr. Manish Tiwari will be delivering a talk on the topic Polar Ocean Monsoon Teleconnections, Evidences from the Past, which is a topic of relevance for scientists and engineers working in the field of atmospheric and ocean sciences. So Dr. Manish Tiwari is the Group Director for the Arctic Operations and Scientist F at the National Center for Polar and Ocean Research in Goa. So his group manages India's scientific activities in the Arctic region, including the Indian research base Himadri in the Norwegian Arctic. So Dr. Tiwari's research interests are quantifying past climatic and oceanographic changes through isotopic and geochemical studies of marine sediments. He is particularly interested in understanding the evolution of the Indian monsoon system and its teleconnection with the polar regions. So Dr. Tiwari holds a Ph.D. in geology from Physical Research Laboratory, Ahmedabad, and obtained bachelor's and master's degree in geology from Banaras Hindu University, Varanasi. He has received numerous awards and honors for his outstanding contributions, including the Young Scientist Medal of the Indian National Science Academy, the Young Scientist Award of the Indian Science Congress Association, and Certificate of Merit by the Ministry of Earth Sciences, Government of India, among others. Dr. Tiwari has also led externally funded research projects and established the state-of-art laboratories at NCPOR. He has mentored 7 PhD students, including current ones, and served as editor and reviewer for renowned scientific journals. He has 70 peer-reviewed publications with a total citation of around 1,000 and H-index of 20. So with this brief introduction, it is my proud privilege today to kindly invite our speaker, Dr. Manish Tiwari, to deliver the talk. Now the participants are requested that the questions and answers session will be attended after completing the talk, and the questions can be messaged for the speaker in the chat box. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Professor Bhaskar, for such a nice introduction, and rather a long introduction, because longer the introduction, more is the expectation from the speaker. So now you have put me under some expectations, so I would try to fulfill that. So moving to my talk, this picture fascinates me. If you can see here, this picture shows the global population density, and you can see that most of the population is concentrated in the tropics, and that also in monsoon dominated regions of South Asia and East Asia. But the impact of climate change, that is most felt in the polar regions, whether it is Arctic or whether it is the Southern Ocean surrounding Antarctica. So this climate change, which is impacting the polar regions most, whether it has any effect on the tropics, tropic climatic phenomena like monsoon, because then it will influence billions of people's life. Therefore, this motivates me to study the polar regions and how they influence monsoon. And I am a paleoceanographer and paleoclimatologist. That is, I study the past oceanographic and past climatic conditions of the Earth. ranging over last several thousand to millions of years. So today I will be presenting before you some of our studies we have carried out at NCPOR, my institute, National Center for Polar and Ocean Research, regarding this topic, polar ocean and monsoon teleconnection, and what past tell us about this relationship. So before, okay, changing the slide. Okay. So before I move forward, I should acknowledge my team, because what I am presenting today is because of them only, and I am standing on their shoulders. So starting with Vikas Kumar, these are my Ph.D. students and now placed at the various places. Vikas Kumar, who is a scientist at NCPOR, Shubham, who is right now a postdoc at Banaras Hindu University, Padmasini Behra, my ex-PhD student, who is now in Leicester, UK. Likewise, my other colleagues, Sarath, Vaila, Sharmila, and Tejaswar. So you will be hearing their names during the course of my presentation, where I will be mentioning their papers. So it is better to put a face to the name. And I also thank Ocean Society of India for giving me an opportunity to present my work in front of you, and my supporting institutes, National Center for Polar and Ocean Research and the Ministry of Earth Sciences. So with this, let us move to the top. So this is the Asian monsoon. You can see that Asian monsoon is basically a manifestation of seasonal northward migration of the rain band or the intertropical convergence zone. Here you can see that this is the rain band which is moving during the summer months. It moves over India and cause intense precipitation. But thus we are observing today. But Earth is much, much older. And so monsoon has also varied on various time scales. So let us look at the time scales at which monsoon has varied. Now this picture shows the time scales and forcings of monsoon. Here you can see the time scales which range from diurnal cycle to intra-seasonal to annual to interannual variability to interdecadal to multi-decadal variability. So these variabilities, year-to-year variability or decade-to-decade variability, that can be comprehended in a human lifetime. But monsoon varies even on longer time scales such as centennial time scales, hundreds of year time scale, then on suborbital or millennial time scale, that is thousands of year time scales, on orbital time scales, which is 10,000 to 100,000 year time scale, and then there is tectonic variability, which is of the order of millions of years. So monsoon varies on various time scales, and these are the various forcing factors of monsoon, which are external forces. There are internal forces. So internal forces includes atmospheric internal dynamics, land-air interaction, sea-air interaction like ENSO, etc., IOD. Then there is deep role of deep ocean, northern and southern hemisphere ice sheets. Likewise, there are external forces such as orbital forces and tectonic forces. So the point is that right now, when we are forecasting monsoon or we are looking at monsoon, we are mostly worried at year-to-year variability, or mostly we are worried to decadal variability. In these time scales, monsoon is mostly governed by these forcings, such as ENSO or other atmospheric internal dynamics. So because of this, people don't pay much attention to the other regions of the earth that may influence monsoon. Likewise, when we move much farther into time scale, such as orbital variability, in these time scales, the monsoon is governed by the orbital parameter of the earth, such as its eccentricity, tilt, and precession, etc. And on a much larger time scale, millions of year time scale, monsoon is governed by tectonic variability, which is basically mountain building and appearances and disappearances of the oceans. But in between, okay. But in between, there is a time scale which is centennial to millennial time scale. In this time scale, these forcings are not that important, and even orbital and tectonic forces are not that predominant. So in these time scales, we can study suborbital forces, and these suborbital forces include polar climate variability, which may influence monsoon. Therefore, while we are studying these short time scales, we may not see polar influence of polar climate. When we are studying much longer time scale, we may not see influence of polar climate. But when we study this suborbital forcings, suborbital time scale, centennial to millennial to multi-millennial, then we may be able to see the polar climate, influence of polar climate variability. Now, one thing to note is all these forcings are working on all the time scales. The only thing is, In shorter time scales, these forcings have higher amplitude, so they dominate, they force a monsoon predominantly. And on these longer time scales, these forcings have higher amplitude, so they predominantly influence the monsoon. So this may tell you that what are the inherent variabilities in monsoon. Now let us look at polar regions. Now here in the top we have the Arctic Ocean, in the bottom we have the Southern Ocean, and these are the regions where very important phenomena happens, which is the initiation of the thermohaline circulation. So these lines shows you the thermohaline circulation, wherein in the North Atlantic and Arctic Atlantic boundary, the deep water forms, it sinks to the bottom of the ocean and it travels to Southern Ocean. There it mixes with another deep water, which is Antarctic bottom water. And then these bottom water travels as bottom water and intermediate waters throughout the world oceans. They upwell in the equatorial regions. And then as warmer surface currents, they again go back to Atlantic and Southern Ocean. Thus, what happens in polar regions does not stay in polar region. They influence the whole globe. So let us see how it happens. Now this is the same picture of thermohaline circulation, but in a three-dimensional way. So here you can see the Southern Ocean is basically the town square where the climate signal from all over the globe come meet, and again they exchange information and then disperse apart. Therefore, any change happening in Southern Ocean will have massive global ocean and climate consequences. So in the present scenario of global warming, what are the changes happening in the Southern Ocean, the ocean surrounding Antarctica? So this is Antarctic continent and this is Southern Ocean surrounding Antarctica. Now here you can see that there is warming, but differential warming going on in Southern Ocean. Southern Ocean plays a major role in global ocean heat uptake and storage. Almost 60% of the global ocean heat content since 1970 is stored in Southern Ocean. Southern Ocean area is only 30% of the global ocean, but 60% of the heat it has stored. But the warming is inhomogeneous. Upper 1000 meters of the Southern Ocean, within and north of the Antarctic circumpolar current, that is this region, north of the Antarctic circumpolar current, that region is warming rapidly at a rate of 0.1 to 0.2 degrees Celsius per decade. But the surface subpolar seas south of this region are not warming, this area near to Antarctica, that is not warming, or it is either slightly cooling. But subpolar abyssal waters are warming at a substantial rate of 0.05 degrees Celsius per decade, but the deeper waters are warming. So there is warming happening in the Southern Ocean in the mid latitudes. So whether this warming has any influence on the monsoon. So how do we study that? So I told you that we study the monsoon on centennial to millennial, 100 to thousands of year to millions of year time scale. But how do we do that? For that we use what we call as archives, which in themselves record various proxies. Water proxies I will tell. But these archives are things like marine sediment core. You can see a picture of a sediment core. Likewise, there are lake sediment cores called as lacustrine sediment cores. They will also look like a sediment core. Then there are speleothems, which are the cave deposits, calcium carbonate, stalactite and stalagmite. Then there are ice cores, tree rings, corals. So they store the information about the climate when they were growing, and we can go and study these archives and withdraw that information about past. So I work in marine sediment cores, and for collecting sediment cores, we go into oceanic cruises. And this is one of the example in the ocean cruise in which I had participated, which is International Ocean Discovery Program, Expedition 355 in Arabian Sea, wherein we drill the ocean bottom. So this picture shows how this coring activity takes place. Here the ship goes and drills the ocean bottom. And once it drills, the sediment is brought to the deck of the ship. There that core, which is called as a sediment core, and then that sediment core is cut into smaller section. It is cut open and further stored for future analysis. So once you cut open a sediment core, it would look something like this, and you can go back in time layer by layer. So you can do a time travel. And in this sediment course, what we study specifically is the isotopic ratios of these organisms, the shells of these organisms, which are called as foraminifera. Now these are single-celled microorganisms. They are very small. They are sand size. If you go to the beach and take a particle of the sand, so that is the size of these organisms. And they secrete calcium carbonate shells of unpadded beauty. These are their that is how they look under the microscopes. And there are two types, planktic and benthic. Planktic are which lives on the ocean surface, and benthic lives on the ocean bottom. So when we want to study ocean surface conditions, we study planktic, and we want to study ocean bottom conditions, we study benthic forams. So the proxies I had mentioned. So the proxies which I'm sorry, I'm having a bit of sore throat. I was suffering from common cold, so I'm having a sore throat. So I have a little bit disturbance in between. But these are the proxies we study, which is the oxygen and carbon isotope ratios for amnifera, nitrogen and carbon isotope ratios sedimentary organic matter, organic and inorganic geochemistry, total organic carbon, total nitrogen, trace metal. Then we do quantification of temperature, that how was exactly the temperature was in past, that we do using trace element ratios. And then we study the abundance of key foraminifera species. So these proxies, these isotopic proxies, we analyze in the laboratories we are established in NCPOR, which is one of these marine stable isotope lab. So this lab stores the dual inlet gas source isotope ratio mass spectrometer, and using this mass spectrometer, we analyze the oxygen and carbon isotopes of foraminifera and carbon nitrogen isotopes of organic matter. Likewise, we have established a paleothermometry lab, which literally means past temperature measurement labs. See, if you want to measure the present temperature, you can put a thermometer in the ocean and you will come to know that what is the sea surface temperature. But when you want to study what was the temperature of the oceans thousands or millions of years back, then what do? So for that, we use a technique which is known as trace element ratio analysis, which is basically a ratio of the magnesium to calcium in the foraminifera, and that is directly proportional to the temperature. So depending on this ratio, we can calculate the past temperature. So these are the paleoclimatic studies we carried out at NCPOR, and these studies include various programs under Indian Arctic Program, Indian Southern Ocean Expeditions, International Ocean Discovery Program, Indian Antarctic Program. So we have cores from all over the globe. So we have a global footprints starting from Arctic to Antarctica. And today I will be discussing cores from Arctic, from Southern Ocean, and from Indian Ocean for monsoon reconstruction. So first let us look how the Southern Hemisphere influences the monsoon, how the Southern Ocean influences the monsoon. So to understand that, we had done a study from a sediment core from the Southern Indian Ocean. This is the place from where the monsoon winds start, and this was published in Polar Sciences by Tiwari, Vikas Kumar et al. And this is the sediment, this is the region from where the monsoon winds originate. Basically, those are the southeast trade winds, and this region is just north of the Mascarene High region. And these southeast trade winds crosses the equator and becomes the southwest monsoon winds. Now, stronger those monsoon winds, more will be the mixed layer depth in this region. So strong winds associated mixing during the summer monsoon season correlates well with the deepening of the mixed layer. So if we can determine the depth of this mixed layer, we can determine the strength of the monsoon winds. So for this purpose, we took measured isotopic ratios in two species, one species living on the surface and another species living at the bottom of the mixed layer depth. So whenever there was difference in those isotopic ratio of those two species is higher, it means that the mixed layer depth was deeper and the monsoon winds were stronger. So here you can see, this is the record, the purple colored of the isotopic difference between these two species, the bottom of the mixed layer depth and surface dwelling species. And we find that there are 9 periods during this 40 to 180,000 years ago when this difference in isotopic ratio was quite high, which means that monsoon was much stronger during those time period. Likewise, there were other 8 periods when this difference was very less. It means that mixed layer depth was very low and monsoon was much weaker. So whenever we compared our record of this monsoon strength with record from Antarctica. The bottom two panel are the Antarctic temperature record from ice core. This is the Epica Dome core, and this is the Epica Dome ED-ML record, and the lowest one is from the North Atlantic. So what we found that our monsoon record matches very well with the Antarctic temperature records. Whenever there were warm Antarctic condition shown by these yellow bands, and those time there was a decline in ISM circulation. So warm Antarctica corresponded with a weaker monsoon. So we speculated that this climate anomaly must be transferred to southern mid latitudes that may further influence the mascarene high and the Indian summer monsoon. But to test this, we needed a quantitative study where we have reconstruction of the exact sea surface temperatures. So to fulfill that, we did a study where we quantified the sea surface temperature variability from the Southern Ocean since the last glacial period. So last glacial period covers around 60 to 70,000 years, and we had a last glacial maximum at around 21,000 years. And before that, there was a little bit warmer period, which is known as interstadial, but still it was a glacial period, which is known as MIS3. So we study a core which covered the last glacial period, and we quantified the SST. It was published by Kumar et al. In Paleoceanography, AAG Journal in 2021. So this is the core. This core we took from the boundary of the Southern Ocean, which we call as the Southern Ocean Mid-Latitude or SML. So this is the this study was the first centennial scale quantitative climate reconstruction. Before that, there was no such high resolution reconstruction of sea surface temperature for such a long period. And then, since it was a quantitative reconstruction in terms of exact sea surface temperature, so it allows us data model intercomparison. So what we did, this shows the sea surface temperature variability in that region, in the Southern Ocean mid-latitudes. And this is a time period from 4,000 years before present to around 25,000 years before present, which is the peak of glaciation is around LGM 21,000 years ago. So this is how temperature varied in the Southern Ocean mid-latitude. The coldest SST was during the last glacial maximum, this one. Then there was overall an average of 4 degrees Celsius change during last glacial interglacial transition. Then Antarctic style deglaciation with Henry. Okay, so now this one, the Southern Ocean temperature is following the Antarctic style Antarctic temperature. I'm having a lot of problem in this. Okay, so the temperatures are following the Antarctic style. Now, what is happening that this period is known as the Heinrich Stadium, which is a cooler period in the northern hemisphere. But here you can see the temperature is increasing. Now, this matches with the Antarctic style warming. Then there is Antarctic cold reversal. At that time, we are finding a decrease in temperature in our record also. So basically, the Southern Ocean temperature follows the Antarctic temperatures, but it has its own variability as well, which we see in the during the Holocene when the Antarctic temperatures are not declining that much, but here the southern mid-latitude temperatures have declined considerably during the Holocene. Now we compared our proxy record with the reconstruction with a model reconstruction. Now since we had SST, so we can compare with a modeled SST, and the model we used is known as the Loveklin model, which is a three-dimensional Earth system model of intermediate complexity. Now we can see that this model faithfully follows the observation. So this model is validated that whatever has happened in that region is perfectly captured by the model, such as this warming episode, this cooling episode, again this warming, and then a warming trend. So we can use this model to further study those periods where we don't have proxy data. Then we compared our ISM variability with the we compared our sea surface temperature reconstruction with the monsoon reconstruction. Now here you can see that whenever there were higher SST, so this monsoon reconstruction, the bottom panel, it is basically based on the stalactite and stalagmites, which is from Cheng et al. 2016 Nature paper. And the lower portion shows, the yellow band shows weak monsoon, whereas when it goes up, it means stronger monsoon during these periods. So what we find, whenever there were higher SSTs, the monsoon was weaker. And whenever there were lower SSTs, for example, this period or this period, or during Holocene, when the monsoon, when the temperatures are declining, at that time, the monsoon was stronger. So, higher SSTs in southern ocean mid-latitudes, weaker monsoon, lower SSTs in southern ocean mid-latitude, stronger monsoon. We further compared our temperature reconstruction with monsoon strength record from the northern Bay of Bengal and Eastern Arabian Sea. This is by Kudras et al. Bay of Bengal and Eastern Arabian Sea from Saraswat et al. And here you can see that whenever the temperature is declining in the southern ocean mid-latitude, at that time the runoff is increasing. So we found higher runoff during the colder southern mid-latitude SSTs. And then we further compared with other millennial scale SST record from the tropical Indian Ocean and from the Western Arabian Sea, which is the top panel and the bottom panel. And we found that they match very closely with the southern ocean mid-latitude temperature variability. Whenever we have lower temperatures, at that time temperature declined in the tropical Indian Ocean and in the Western Arabian Sea. And when we had higher temperature, we had higher temperature in the Western Tropical Indian Ocean and Western Arabian Sea as well. And then we compared it with a DIC report that dissolved in inorganic carbon, delta 13 CO of dissolved inorganic carbon based on Benthic foraminifera from intermediate depth. And that also more or less follows the temperature variability, though it is very coarse resolution. So this led us to believe that the signals from southern mid latitude is transferred to the Indian Ocean, to the southern and northern Indian Ocean via oceanic currents, which is southern ocean intermediate waters such as Antarctic intermediate water and sub-Antarctic mode waters. These mode waters carries the climatic signals from southern mid latitude towards the Indian Ocean and influence monsoon, which are the oceanic tunnels. Then to further explore that what could be the mechanism, we compared our modeled SST. This is the modeled SST, very high resolution during the deglaciation after removing the orbital trend. We compared our SST reconstruction during deglaciation with a meridional temperature gradient from the model itself. So meridional temperature gradient is the difference in the seasonal SST values between the northern and the southern Indian Ocean. Now, as we know that monsoon depends a lot on the cross-equatorial pressure gradient, which is maintained by the Indian low and masculine high. So now, and that is controlled by the SST. So higher the temperature gradient, stronger will be the monsoon. So what we found that whenever there were high SSTs shown by the yellow bands, now the scale is reversed here. Now whenever we have higher SSTs, the temperature gradient was weaker. It means that, and whenever we have lower SSTs, the peaks, at that time the temperature gradient was stronger, which would have led to stronger monsoon. So the Southern Ocean SSTs control the meridional temperature gradient, which in turn controls the monsoon. Now that was during deglaciation, the last 12 to 20,000 years. Then we did the same exercise for MIS3, which is basically 30 to 50,000 years ago, that a 20,000 year long period. In this period, the top portion shows the SST of from the model reconstruction. The bottom portion shows the meridional temperature gradient, again for model, and the middle curve shows the monsoon record, which is a proxy based record from the stalactites and stalagmites from bit to cave from northern India. So in this also we find that whenever we have higher SSTs, the monsoon was weaker and the meridional temperature gradient was also weaker. And when we have lower SSTs, again the scale is reversed here. Whenever we have lower SSTs, in southern ocean mid latitudes, the monsoon was stronger, and the meridional temperature gradient was also stronger. So there is a very strong correlation between the SSTs in the southern ocean mid latitudes and meridional temperature gradient and monsoon. And then we also did an exercise of calculating the rolling standard deviation. And here we found that the standard deviation in the case of variance in the case of southern mid latitude SSTs peaks at around millennial to multi-millennial time scales nearing around 5,000 years. Whereas the variance in El Nino ENSO, for example, it peaks only at 1 year scale. So whatever its variability of ENSO is there, it is achieved on interannual time scale, and then it stays more or less uniform. Whereas the variance of the mid-latitude SST peaks at around multi-millennial time scale, and when we check for monsoon record, its variance also matches with the variance of the mid-latitude SST. So initially on annual and shorter time scales, its variance may not be as high as ENSO. So ENSO is dominating on shorter time scales, but as the time scale increases, the variance of mid-latitude SST becomes dominant and controls the monsoon. We also did a spatial correlation to see how the SST is related to the sea level pressure field. So we did a spatial correlation between the normalized SST index at the sampling location and the normalized surface pressure field for that 20,000 year, 30 to 50,000 year. So what we find that with the surface level pressure at masculine high region, it is negatively correlated to the SST. Whereas in the northern Indian Ocean, the sea level pressure is positively correlated to the SST. It means that whenever we have lower SSTs in this region, the masculine high would be stronger, the Indian low will be stronger, so there will be a stronger temperature gradient and a cross equatorial pressure gradient, which will lead to a stronger monsoon. So this gives an atmospheric bridge also, where the sea level SSTs in the Southern Ocean can influence the masculine high region, which has its own influence on the monsoon then. So this was all about Southern Ocean, and I showed that how Southern Ocean on millennial time scale influences monsoon via oceanic tunnels and atmospheric bridges. But Arctic is also changing, and is changing very fast. This picture shows the atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration, which is increasing from 1960 onwards. And here is the temperature of the globe and of Arctic. And you can see that Arctic temperature is increasing 3 to 4 times higher than the global temperature, which is because of Arctic amplification. And this Arctic amplification is causing a massive Arctic sea ice loss, both in the sea ice extent as well as sea ice volume. Here the different curve shows the decadal variability. So as we progress from 90s, 80s to 90s to 2000 to 2010s, the sea ice keep on decreasing. This is the present year. Likewise, the sea ice volume is also here shown decadal variability. As we progresses from 80s to 90s to 2000 to 2010s, the sea ice is going on decreasing, and it is projected to be ice-free soon. So whether this reduction in sea ice, does it have any influence of monsoon? So for this, some studies have been done on the present day. For example, on the study from NCPOR, Saurabh Chatterjee and Ravichandran et al., they have shown that the frequency of the extreme Indian summer monsoon rainfall events are negatively correlated with the Arctic sea ice extent. That is, lower the Arctic sea ice, more will be the extreme monsoon rainfall events. But this study is very short, based on few decades data. So we need to validate, we need to check whether it was happening on longer time scales, longer time series data, and when the Earth was in a different climate state, fundamentally different climate state. So to do that, we have to take the help of past reconstructions. And for this, we did a reconstruction, a study from near the Svalbard region, which is in Norwegian Arctic. Here you can see is the Arctic Ocean surrounded by Greenland, Canadian Arctic, Alaska, and Siberia. And then this is the Norwegian Arctic. This island is the Svalbard. And here the core was taken from a fjord known as Kongsfjorden, from a place known as Ny-Ålesund. In Ny-Ålesund, we have Indian Research Station, Himadri, where we send our teams every year for various research proposals. And soon we are going to advertise for next round of studies there. So keep an eye on the NCPOR website and you will come to know if you want to study Arctic, you would like to apply in that advertisement. But coming back to the study, so we took the sediment core from this fjord, from this region of Arctic, and the data and the results were published a few months back in Global and Planetary Change, Vikas Kumar Manish Tiwari et al., wherein we have studied the sediment core for the last 1,000 years. This core spanned the last 1,000 years and studied various geochemical proxies. So in this location, we have earlier studied the spatial variability in this fjord, and we have published those, and we have shown that the fjord is sensitive to the climatic variability in this region. So the sediments from this fjord, from near this fjord, can be used for reconstructing the past climate. So this is the record of past climate we generated from this place, which covers the last 1,000 years. Here you can see on the bottom the last the record covers. This is present 2000 AD, and this is 1,000 years before present. So this covers a 1,000-year long record. So we had measured total nitrogen, total organic carbon, delta 15N, and delta 13C. So you can see that they respond to climatic variability, but it is very hard to find a trend except in delta 15N, which is showing a trend. So what we did to simplify this, we did principal component analysis, and PC1 and PC2 explain the 93% of variance in the data. And then using a Gaussian mixture model, we identified two clusters in this using this principal component analysis. So these two clusters we named cluster 1 and cluster 2. So these two clusters respond to different climatic periods, but which climate period do these two different clusters correspond to, we need to find out. So for that, what we did, that we did a surface air temperature composite difference between intervals of the two clusters. So we took, using the last millennium reanalysis, we took the surface air temperature composite between the intervals of those clusters and subtracted the cluster 1 from cluster 2, and we found anomalous warming over the Arctic region. It means that the data points of cluster 1 correspond to the warmer climate, whereas data points of the cluster 2 here, they correspond to the colder climate. So that is how we can identify which data in our record, in our reconstruction, correspond to which type of climate. Now, I mentioned that delta 15N was showing a good trend. So we compared our delta 15N variability with surface temperature anomaly reconstruction from northern hemisphere and from Arctic. And we found that delta 15N is a very good indicator of warmth and cold in Arctic region. As you can say, during the warmer period of medieval warm period and present, the delta 15N is high, whereas during the cooler periods of the Little Ice Age, when Earth was a little bit in cooler condition, the delta 15N was lower. So this depends on the relative utilization. That is explained much detail in our other paper, Behra et al. In 2021 paper, that you can see to understand this phenomenon. But the point is that delta 15N corresponds to the warm and cold condition in Arctic. And we further confirmed it by plotting our delta 15N with other temperature reconstructions from other places of Arctic. And we found that it overall, not peak to peak, but overall it matches with colder and warmer conditions. So this strong warm anomaly in Arctic, does it correspond to Indian monsoon in any way? So we look at the evidence from the proxy data. So here we have our proxy record of delta 15N from that fjord, and as we have seen that this delta 15N, this is the warm period, this is the cold period, this is the cold period in Arctic, and this is the warm period, and these are the records from of the Indian monsoon wind from the Arabian Sea. This is a record of Indian monsoon for the last 1,000 years from speleothem records. From southern China, from central China, central India, and western Loess Plateau. And then this is the PC1 component of these records to simplify this trend. So we see that whenever the Arctic was warm, for example, in this region or this region, the monsoon was stronger here, or even in the Bullaides wind record or in the precipitation record, you can see. And when Arctic was cooler, like this, at that time, the monsoon was weaker. So Proxy gives a very good evidence spanning the last 1,000 years that warmer Arctic, stronger monsoon, cooler Arctic, weaker monsoon. And then we did a exercise of, we took a difference in precipitation obtained from the last millennium reanalysis, and we subtracted our cold cluster intervals from the warm cluster intervals. And we found that when we subtract cold minus warm at that time, precipitation declined over India. So whenever colder conditions are in Arctic, the precipitation would decline over India, but is spatially inhomogeneous. And to further explore the mechanisms, we took a difference in surface air temperature, which is the difference between the surface air temperature composites of the warm cluster and cold cluster Arctic intervals during the last millennium, and we found a positive temperature anomaly over Tibetan Plateau. That is, whenever there were warmer periods over Arctic and colder periods over Arctic. So when we subtract the surface temperature for the same periods over Tibetan Plateau, the Tibetan Plateau was also warmer. And a warmer Tibetan Plateau, it is at a height of 4,000 meters. So at mid-tropospheric level, it can impart heat into that mid-troposphere and would strengthen the meridional temperature gradient. So that enhancement of meridional temperature gradient can increase the monsoon. But when we study the last 1,000 years, we do not touch the CO2 concentration that we had, that we are having now. If forget the last 1,000 years, even we go last 10,000 or last 100,000 years or last 1 million years, we will never have the CO2 concentration what we have right now. So this is ISCOR record showing the last 800,000 years CO2 concentration. And this is the CO2 concentration in 2021, 414 ppm. Right now we are at 420 ppm. We have crossed 420 ppm. So you can see the last 800,000 years, there the CO2 was never as high as present. So if we want to know that how the monsoon and how our climate is going to behave when CO2 is so high, then we have to go into a period when CO2 was as high as today. And such a period is mid-Pliocene warm period, which happened around 3 million years ago. So this is a geological time scale. Though 3 million years ago may look very old, but in geological time scale, it is quite recent. So this shows the CO2 concentration during the 3 million years ago. And here you can see the CO2 concentration was sometimes even higher than present. So if you want to understand that how in a future warming scenario the monsoon is going to behave and how the Arctic monsoon relation may change. So studying this period can help us. So we studied this period using under a project which was a joint Indo-Norwegian research project known as Pliocene Arctic Climate Teleconnection. And in this project, we studied the long ODP course, the ship I had shown, where we collect kilometer-long course, so that we can go further back into the past. And in this project, we studied ODP course from Arctic and a IOTP course from the Arabian Sea, and we reconstructed sea ice concentration in this core and monsoon in this core for that period 3 million years ago, and we compared how they behave. So these are the data from that core, which shows that. So this was a coarse resolution study which we did few years back, in which we found that this was the data for last 10 million years, and here we found that monsoon shows a increase during the mid-Pliocene warm period. So we studied this period, only this period, in a higher resolution, and here it was. Here is the data from in higher resolution. So this is the mid-Pliocene warm period, and here is the time. You can see this study covers a time period from 2.7 million years ago to 3 million years to 3.4 million years ago, and this is the mid-Pliocene warm period when the CO2 was as high as today, and before that and after that are the cooler periods. So what we see that there is higher precipitation during warmer periods of Pliocene. So whenever the periods of warmer, for example, mid-Pliocene warm period, all these are the indicator of proxies of monsoon, which is denitrification, productivity, chemical weathering, etc. All of these proxies shows a enhancement. Now, There are other reasons for this intensification of monsoon, which I will not go into detail. But the point here is that in a high CO2 scenario, in a global warming scenario, monsoon is going to increase. But this study is from a single core, so it gives you an average of the monsoon, but it does not tell you about the spatial variability. For spatial variability, we did a model study using a model Aussie layers, and we took a difference in the rainfall during the warmer mid-Pliocene warm period and the cooler interval after it. So we modeled the precipitation during the MPWP and during the cooler period after it, and we took a difference that what would be the difference between a warmer and cooler period. And we found that it was spatial inhomogeneity was there in a high CO2 scenario. The Western Ghats would receive much more precipitation. The Gujarat and Rajasthan would receive higher precipitation. Uttarakhand and Himachal Pradesh, you can see, receive higher precipitation, whereas the precipitation decreased in the Indo-Gangetic plain in over northeastern India and eastern India and southern Kerala. So this is the what we are observing nowadays. Nowadays, also in the news, we are listening and reading that monsoon is causing havoc in Rajasthan and Gujarat and Uttarakhand. So in a high CO2 scenario, this is how monsoon is going to change. The extremes are going to increase, but it will be spatially inhomogeneous. And then we compare it with a present record also, which is the rainfall trend for last 100 years from Proxy et al. 2015. And last 100-year trends also show that monsoon is strengthening over the Konkan, over the Gujarat, Rajasthan, Uttarakhand, and declining over Indo-Gangetic plain, northeastern India, and southern Konkan coast. So, what is happening today has happened in the past, and it tells us how the monsoon is going to behave. Now, finally, we compared it with the Arctic sea ice reconstruction. Now, if you want to compare with sea ice, then present day you can detect the sea ice using remote sensing or using in situ measurement. But how to reconstruct sea ice millions of years ago? So for that, a proxy we used, which is known as spring sea ice concentration proxy. This is basically the factors also, which I had told you earlier, such as orbital parameters like solar insolation, which is governed by orbital parameters of eccentricity, tilt, and precession, by CO2 variability, by cold and warm conditions. So, but overall, what we found, whenever there was higher Arctic sea ice, the monsoon was weaker. And when there was lower Arctic sea ice, the monsoon was stronger. So, there is one theory by Schneider et al. That high Arctic sea ice can cause northward transport of energy from the northern tropical boundary, which would cause northward cross equatorial energy flux, and that would cause southward shift of the ITCZ. So whenever high Arctic sea ice extent is there, it would cause the ITCZ, that is the rain belt, to shift southward, and monsoon will decline over India. Whereas when lower Arctic sea ice extent is there, reverse of it will happen, and monsoon will be stronger over India. So I think now I am getting towards the end of my time. So this is the last slide where I show the takeaways from this talk. So in this talk, I tried to cover a lot of things from Southern Ocean to Arctic Ocean, and from Indian Ocean, monsoon, polar climate variability, their reconstruction over various time scales. But the point here is that tropical oceans control most of the interannual variance in Indian monsoon intensity right now. Right now, we are all worried about ENSO, IOD, how they are going to happen, what is the El Nino condition, El Nina condition, how it will affect monsoon. But this could change in future as the polar amplification intensified its relative dominance on Indian monsoon variability even on shorter scale. So you see that here, this is the temperature variability over various years. Now you see that temperature over the polar regions, whether it is Arctic and Antarctica, is fluctuating much higher than what is happening in other parts of the globe. This is because of what is called as polar amplification. So this variability will also become important and can influence monsoon on shorter time scales as well. But I showed you that right now it is influencing a longer time scale, which is Southern Ocean mid-latitude SSTs are the predominant controlling factors on millennium time scale. Whenever we have cooler Southern Ocean SSTs, mid-latitudes, we have stronger Indian summer monsoon, and a warmer Arctic and lower sea ice extent, the conditions like we have right now, results in intensified monsoons, which is spatially variable, and there is increased likelihood for extremes. With this, I would like to end my talk, and I would encourage you to take a screenshot of this slide so that whatever I have discussed is presented from these papers. So if you have any doubt or if you want to revisit it, you can go to these papers, and or you can write to me at my email manish@ncpr.res.in, and I can respond to your queries, or even if you want to ask a PDF of these papers, I can give you that. So with that, I would like to thank you. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Manish Tiwari. It's a very interesting and very informative talk. And I could understand from your slides that you have made very huge efforts actually in connecting all this in situ data, then joining the dots, and then relating that with the Indian summer monsoon. It's very interesting. It's a really fantastic work. So I'm very sure that this will open new dimensions actually to the young researchers for the current research in the Indian summer monsoon.
Yes.
So firstly, I would like to thank you for this very interesting talk, and I have listed some few points from your talk and some few questions also. I have some of them are very general in nature, some are very technical.
Right, sir.
Yeah. So firstly, you started with giving a very interesting overview of the Asian summer monsoon, the time scale and forcings.
Yeah.
And then you also talked about the influence of polar climate variability, that is basically the land, sea, and air interactions.
Yeah.
Covering actually the diurnal cycle, the intraseasonal, annual, centennial, suborbital, orbital, and the tectonic variability. And the long time series, which is starting from tens of days to 10 to the power of 6 to 10 to the power of 8 years.
Yes.
With the monsoon is connected. It's very interesting. And you also listed about the importance of the southern oceans and the global warming and the southern ocean circulation, how they play a role in this Indian summer monsoon. And you also listed about the proxy records, which covers marine sediment cores, lake sediment cores, ice cores, tree rings, corals, and also the coring activity that has been conducted, in which the layer by layer study has been done for finding out the times. You specifically actually stressed upon this foraminifera, and the different types of multiple proxies. And you also showed about the paleothermometry laboratory that you have done the study. Thereafter, actually, you link this monsoon circulation with the Antarctica temperature. And I think you pointed out that the strong and the weak monsoons have a direct connection with the Antarctic conditions, which is synchronous with the decline in the summer monsoon circulation. So basically, you're trying to say that like the warm Antarctic conditions can lead to weaker monsoons actually.
Yes.
And you also touched upon the SST variability, then the quantification from southern oceans since the last glacial period, and the spatial correlation with the normalized SST index and the sea level pressure, how they are connected actually. And it was very systematic way that you have covered, and you touched upon the physical understanding of the clusters also, like the warm and the cold clusters, and the evidence from the proxy data that has been collected over time. So the presentation was really good, very good presentation. I'm sure actually that the students, this particularly opened a new dimension for looking into the Indian summer monsoon and its correlation with what happened in the past.
Yeah, that is what I want, that people usually either focus on paleoclimate or they focus on present day climate.
Exactly.
There should be a what you call synchronous, harmonious approach towards it, including the paleo data and the present data.
Okay. So I have actually listed some few questions. Some of, as I mentioned, some of them are very general and some are little technical in nature. Actually, there are some recent studies which mentions about the weakening of the Gulf Stream in the North Atlantic.
Yeah.
So which basically means that less amount of warm waters are basically transported to the Arctic regions.
Yes.
Arctic regions.
Yeah.
So has any study or some research been conducted to see how it influences the Indian summer monsoon?
Yes. So basically, this is related to the weakening of the AMOC, that is the Atlantic body, that is thermohaline circulation, what I have shown.
Yeah.
So that circulation transfers the warm water from Gulf of Mexico towards the northern North Atlantic, where it cools down and it further sinks.
Yeah.
Now, because of the global warming and all, it is with this AMOC is weakening.
Yeah.
The thermal circulation is weakening.
Yeah.
And because of that, this circulation is weakening, and because of that, there is a cooling in the northern North Atlantic. A cool blob has developed in the northern North Atlantic, and the Gulf of Mexico and tropical waters are getting warmer. So
Yeah,
now this will have the similar effect like increasing sea ice.
Yeah.
You are increasing cold in that region. So increasing cold in northern North Atlantic or Arctic, that is going to when you have cold, you are going to decline. You are going to strengthen you are going to weaken the monsoon.
Right, right.
So basically, weakening of thermohaline circulation, increase of cold in the northern North Atlantic and Arctic is going to weaken the monsoon. So it has been seen in model data as well.
Yeah, that is fine. And parallel to that, there is also one more published article which I was going through, that is on asymmetric heating over the hemispheres, northern and southern hemispheres. The paper basically says that the southern hemisphere is getting warm.
Yeah.
And there's an imbalance of heat between the two hemispheres. They have actually linked that with different physical mechanisms, but what they found was actually the southern hemisphere warming is taking place at a rapid rate.
Yeah.
That is one thing actually.
So this is what we call as, and this is not seen now. It has been happening since millions of years.
Right,
so
right.
This is what we call as interhemispheric asynchronity.
Yeah.
They are not in tune because of this thermohaline circulation. Now this thermohaline circulation connects the northern pole to the southern pole.
Right.
Now whenever this circulation weakens, then the warmth from the southern hemisphere is not transferred to the northern hemisphere.
Okay.
And that is why warm stays in the southern hemisphere and the northern hemisphere gets colder. Okay. So this is also related to the weakening of the thermohaline circulation.
Okay, fine. And one more question I have is, like, when you look into this southern annular mode, SAM, the SAM basically is intensifying in this recent decade. The recent decade it is intensifying, and as well as its orientation is also changing. So how does it influence or its relevance to the Indian summer monsoon? Like what your thoughts on that?
No, sir, there are a few recent studies in the sense they use the present day climatological data, and they have seen that whenever positive SAM is there, then SSTs in the subtropics are higher. And as we have shown that higher SSTs in subtropics would reduce the Indian summer monsoon. So it will have the effect in that way. It will influence the subtropical temperature, and that subtropical temperature may affect the monsoon in the mechanisms I had discussed in my presentation.
Okay, fine. And one of your slides you mentioned about this planktic and the benthic foraminifera. You said that one of the that is, I think, if I'm right, it is a planktic foraminifera which is at the surface.
Yes.
And this benthic foraminifera is from what depth? At what depth actually it is collected? Like,
see, it depends on the depth from which the core is collected. They live on the ocean bottom. Yeah. So my study, one of the paper I had shown, one of the paper from earlier work, they had collected it from around 2,000 meter water depth.
2,000 meters. Okay. And yes, your study basically shows about a very clear polar teleconnection with the Indian summer monsoon. Now, are there any studies which links this with the climatic indices like ENSO, Indian Ocean Dipole, SAM, etc.?
In fact, as I told that these indices are important on shorter time scales.
Yeah.
If you see interannual and decadal time scale, these becomes ENSO and AMO and PDO are very important on that.
Yeah.
But when you go on a bit longer time scales, then they become weak. As I shown that variance curve, then this polar climate variability becomes much more important.
Okay. So my final question actually is, I think it's a very interesting slide actually. You actually have made a very strong correlation. We are showing on the extremes that you're finding in the monsoon over the northwest India, like Gujarat, Rajasthan, where actually it is getting intensified. And you connected that with the late Pliocene precipitation, in which there is a symmetry that is found actually.
Yes.
You're finding a symmetry with that period with present.
Yes.
It's very interesting observation. But one thing which I had in my mind was, like, at that time, this carbon dioxide emissions were not, it's very low actually.
No. Late Pliocene is very important that I showed. At that time, CO2 level were very high. It was as high as today or even higher than present.
Okay, it is basically the
That is the volcanic eruptions, etc.
That is a natural
Yeah,
okay,
natural
process.
Of course, humans are not there.
The humans, the anthropogenic effect is zero at that time. Yeah,
Yeah.
almost zero. I think it's very interesting, see, because the cycles that actually what we are seeing today is already happened in the past.
Yes. Yes.
It's already happened in the past, and that is going to give us a new information or a new message of how we can look into the Indian summer monsoon and how the anthropogenic effects are also adding to it.
Yes.
In controlling it. Thank you very much, Manish. I think there are no other questions. I think in the box. So, on behalf of the Ocean Society of India, I thank you very much for this very interesting and informative talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. Thank you.